In very simple terms, the shorter the string, the more muted the high end and the more diffuse it is. So the pitch is plus or minus a lot more. Mm-hmm. The longer the string, the more that tightens up and the high end becomes more in tune with the fundamental and the more transparent and the easier to mix and the less room in the mix it takes up. And so you can be present without squashing everything around it.
Which means the longer the better?
Longer the better, yeah.
Time to talk about bass guitars, boys and girls. Today's question is, what makes a rock and metal bass guitar sound great? We are here at Guitar Summit in Mannheim. As you can hear, I've lost my voice, but the good news is I don't have to do the talking today. I'm not alone on this channel. I've got a real bass guitar expert here with me. Say hello to Sheldon Dingwall.
Welcome. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Christian.
So great to have you. You make some of the best sounding, I call them dangle heavy metal basses. People probably know them from Adam Nolly Get Good.
Yes. Adam changed the world of bass, I believe. Or at least he accelerated it to where it is now.
Right. He kind of introduced that distorted, clanky tone. Yeah. He didn't invent it, to be honest, but he introduced it to a new generation of people maybe, right?
And well, it's interesting because if you go back even to classic rock and you isolate the bass, it's never really very clean. There's always some overdrive to it.
Yeah, right. Some edge to it. And you always had people like Lemmy, with very distorted tones. The importance of the bass guitar, at least in my world, is much bigger compared to guitars. For metal, as long as you record, let's say, your DI tracks with a decent guitar, with a humbucker, with a good setup, I can make it sound good. Mm-hmm. With bass guitars, I always feel like to get that aggressive, clanky tone, if you have the wrong instrument, there's nothing you can do about it. There's a big difference, and you really need the right instrument to get a great metal tone.
Yeah.
So what makes a metal bass sound great?
I think metal, especially modern metal, because of the low tunings, pushes bass gear to the limits and beyond. And you're right. Ask any engineer what the hardest frequencies are, especially live, what the hardest frequencies are to control and mix. It's the bass frequencies.
Sure.
We never intended to be a brand that has been used so much in metal. We just made basses that sound good to us. And what sounded good to us originated in the piano. And the piano goes back to the harp, and the harp goes back to like 3000 BC. There are Egyptian hieroglyphs with a harp, and the harp is multiscale. And so we'll get to that in a minute. But when I think of metal, I think it's often aggressive, it's often fast. And so a good metal bass needs to be able to handle a wide range of attack, but especially a very heavy attack, and still, punch back. And it also needs to be something that allows the player to play fast, because how do you get to play fast? Well, you have to spend a lot of time practicing. And so the more the instrument is a partner in that, makes it easier to practice, the faster you're going to get, the faster you're going to progress, and the faster you're going to be able to perform.
You said piano wire. That's how I call it. I can just tap a bass usually and go like, okay, this is probably going to sound great. You can hear, if a bass has those piano wire qualities, that usually makes it sound like the low string makes it sound great for metal.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that?
If I go back to designing the very first bass from us, we were getting people coming to us and asking, can you make me a 5-string bass with a good sounding B? And I'm going, well, what have you tried that didn't have one? And they listed off all the names, and I'm going, well, if they haven't figured it out, I don't have anything I can bring to you. But I remember being 4 years old and going up to the piano, and I would run around the bench and hit the treble keys and go, and run around to the other side and hit the bass keys and go, and just hold it and listen to the sustain.
Yeah.
And so the low notes of the piano have always resonated with me. And talk to most bass players, or at least on the internet, and you hear the word fundamental over and over again. Mm-hmm. Fundamental comes for free on a bass guitar. You could have rubber bands for strings and you'd still have good fundamental. Mm-hmm. It's the harmonics above
overtones.
That. And that's where I think the musical information is. That's more in the human vocal range. Yeah. And so our ears and our brain are very finely tuned for the vocal range. And if you add distortion to that, but not the fundamental, then you get a very clear bottom end, easy to control, but you get that saturation in the mids. We achieve that through scale length and careful string design.
So how does the scale length affect the sound, the tone in general?
In very simple terms, the shorter the string, the more muted the high end, and the more diffuse it is. So it's the pitch is plus or minus a lot more. Mm-hmm. The longer the string, the more that tightens up, and the high end becomes more in tune with the fundamental, and the more transparent and the easier to mix, and the less room in the mix it takes up. And so you can be present without squashing everything around it.
Which means the longer the better?
Longer the better, yeah. and that does a couple of things. That also adds tension. And to balance that tension, you make the string thinner, which makes it more flexible and more in tune. And so you can hit it harder without the pitch rising and falling.
Right. Talking about strings, like I think you offer your own strings as well, right?
We accidentally invented the world's first multiscale bass string set.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Gauges. And so rather than try and create a set of strings that works equally well on every bass we can think of, our strings only have to work on our bass. And so we're known for having a 37-inch B. So our B string is engineered to work as best as possible at 37 inches, not 34, not 35, only 37. The E string is engineered to work and sound and play at 36 and a quarter and further down. And so each string has been optimized for that scale length. And I guess I should back up. We use Multiscale, or the Novak's fan fret system, which is essentially like a piano. It's longer bass strings, shorter treble. Yeah. And so each string has been optimized for both tone and tension at that scale length.
Tone of strings, what are the differences and why?
There's a really interesting relationship between the core and then the wrap around the core. And that wrap is there to give it mass, to slow the string down. Yeah. And if you give it too much mass for the tension that you're at, the string will break. Mm-hmm. If there's not enough tension, then the string is super pitchy. And the relationship between tension and pitch change, it goes like this. Mm-hmm. And so the less tension, the more pitch there is. And the higher you get, the closer you get to the breaking point of the string, the less pitch sensitive it is. So there's this window between
the sweet spot
snap and wah, 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 wah. So if you can find that sweet spot, you will have the ability to just attack the string as hard as you want, and the pitch will be stable, and the harmonics line up, and everything's good. Your job's easier, and the audience's ears, these little tiny eardrums that have to process every single frequency, have an easier job of it.
Talking about all the other parameters that define the tone of a bass guitar, let's maybe start with the wood, the body.
All right. Let's get ready for an internet fight here.
Yeah.
Does wood affect the tone?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can the audience hear that? No, absolutely not. But does the musician feel it? Absolutely. Everyone has had an experience where they pick up an instrument and it just, nothing seems to feel right. It seems to fight you. And then you set it down, you grab another one, and this one's so much better. This one feels right. When I pluck a string, I get out what I expect. And that's the wood. That's the setup. Can the wood make a difference in the ultimate tone at the back of the theater? No, but the performance, you'll notice that. And so the wood, if it's a good instrument for you, you'll play better. If you play better, your audience has a better experience.
Like Nolly and me, when we did the masterclass yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about making musicians feel comfortable in the studio.
100%, yeah.
Right? And that's also the experience that I have with like more expensive guitars. If they inspire you to play better, then I don't need to fix or repair the tone later with any fancy gear. Just get it right at the source. And
if you're inspired, you're creating music that you might not have caught before. And so you're creating something, catching something that you may have never had the opportunity to.
Right. What other parameters do we have? Pickups, bridge. So what are the most important tone defining parameters when you build a bass guitar?
I mean, pickups are very important. Preamps are very important, but one interesting thing about using multiscale and then engineering the strings for consistent tone is now you're not compensating with EQ for the imbalance in the tone of the bass. And when you think about it, the strings, if they all have a different tone, the pickup is a mono signal, so it sums everything, mixes it together, and now how do you break out the B string and fix that without messing with the G string? Because frequency-wise, they're not that far apart.
That's a problem that I had or have had with a lot of bass guitars, that you have like one bad sounding string.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. Or I felt like, you know, like one dull or like thin or something sounding string, and that's what it is. So just avoid the deep one and try to play it differently, because so that's one quality for me of a good instrument, a good bass guitar, that is consistent.
Yeah, 100%.
And that has to do with?
Longer string, tighter and brighter and more harmonic structure. Shorter is fatter. So on treble strings, which are already bright sounding naturally, if you shorten them, they fatten up and they sound warmer and more pleasant. On, let's say, the B string or an F sharp, which is a real challenge to get that to sound harmonically rich, lengthening it is the solution.
Okay.
And you can play with different materials, make the neck stiffer. You make the neck stiffer, you make the tone stiffer.
Okay, how?
It's an interaction between the strings and the body. The body is the strings are trying to fold the body in two. And if you resist that, you get more string tone and less wood tone and less organic. And maybe that's what you want. So a really stiff instrument might be your jam. But if you want something
more resonant or more...
I mean, as humans, we've been listening to the sound of wood for how long? As long as there have been humans. And so our DNA is wired to like the sound of wood. And so the more the instrument can sound like wood, the more it catches a part of our...
naturally or organically...
connects with our emotions.
Right. Yeah. Going back to the pickups, what's a good pickup, and what's a good pickup for metal, for those aggressive tones?
I think you can use any pickup you want, but my personal preference is I've always been a precision guy. And so in our pickups, they look like humbuckers, but they're a precision pickup inside a small one.
Okay.
And there's something about the mid-range of a precision that is pleasing to me, but I think it also works well for metal, because if you're sitting in your bedroom, the tone you're going to love is going to be scooped. It's going to sound big and wide, but you try and record that, and all of a sudden it sounds thin. So if you have a more of a nasally mid-centric tone, which is less pleasant by itself, it just fits in the mix better.
Right, that's right. Yeah. What inspired you to start building bass guitars? From checking out the low notes on a piano as a kid, moving on to
that was the big secret. I mean, I'm a guitar player, so and a drummer, and I studied piano, but I hated it. I only did it because my mother
forced you to.
Yep.
And because you like the low notes, right?
And I love the low notes. And so my original, I got into guitars because I couldn't afford a Floyd Rose, and so I designed my own and made it, and didn't cut my fingers off, which is amazing to me now. And that got me hooked on making guitars, and so. Back in the 80s, you couldn't sell a Stratocaster, but you could sell parts and assemble them into a parts guitar like a Van Halen Frankenstein. And that was cool. But an off-the-shelf guitar, that wasn't cool. And so I was really excited by scalloped fingerboards, and I tried a Gittler guitar. Do you know what that is?
No.
It looks like a fish skeleton. It's just a rod with rods. There's no body, no neck.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I put my fingers on it, and I can vibrato entire chord just with my left hand. And I was excited by that, which led me to scalloped fingerboards. And so the whole business concept was, let's just make replacement necks for Stratocasters with scalloped fingerboards. And as soon as I quit the band...
And that was already under the Dingwall, like the Dingwall brand or?
Well... you know, kids are, if you have a name like Dingwall and you're a little kid, there's going to be no end of the funny names you could call a kid named Dingwall. And so my first company was called Progressive Technique.
Okay.
And somebody told me, you know, Sheldon, Gibson, Fender, right? You have to name it after a person, and I didn't really think it through, but that's important in guitars, especially. It's important to have a human quality
connection to somebody.
Yeah. Building next led to building bodies, and then which led to building complete guitars, which wasn't part of the plan, but it was like that's what people wanted. The simple concept is give people what they want. And so then the phone started ringing about, I love my friend's guitar, could you make me a bass? And since I didn't know anything about bass, I was turning these orders down, and it got to the point where, do you ever lie awake because there's a problem you're trying to figure out?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and so I couldn't sleep thinking about the B string, and after about a week of that, I said, screw it, I have to put more time into this. So I talked to the piano people because they already had it figured out.
Yeah.
And you go into the bigger concert halls. The bigger the concert hall, the bigger, the longer the piano is. And if you're sitting in the back of a concert hall and the piano player plays a complex chord, you can still hear the individual notes. Yeah, it's and that's all. They figured it out centuries ago.
So for you, it has always been about like getting the harmonics right.
I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
I just knew that they'd figured it out. So just do what they do. So I talked to piano people. They led me to German research about the clang tone, about the harmonics that run back and forth along the string, and how if they're not timed with the string, you get these inharmonicities. It's a difficult word to say. And it causes it to sound more like a steel drum than a string, especially in the upper frets.
Okay.
And so I just took a Fender bass and took the B string and moved it down to where the G is. So I had lots of runway on the headstock and just built a wooden structure that could slide up and down the headstock and test.
To find the sweet spot for each string, more
just for the B.
Just for the B.
I had no idea about anything else. It was just the B I was searching for. And it was an interesting exercise. Not a lot of change, but as we got closer to 37, it really started to dial in. And then at 37, it's like, okay, there we are.
Wow. Okay. And it's interesting that this going back to building pianos and getting the overtones right in a way translates into even very distorted modern tones, or maybe the distortion even shows that even more clearly because it then again adds a lot of harmonics, basically, right? And
I think you're distorting the right harmonics and you're not creating a mess.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And it's interesting. I mean, I don't have to tell you this, but it's interesting if you take a clean bass signal, it really kind of sticks out in the mix. But as soon as you start to add some saturation, it blends right in.
Absolutely. Right.
I was shocked when I heard that for the first time.
Even if you don't go for like full metal distortion or something, like a touch of saturation, of the natural compression and saturation that a good amp gives you, or like a good tube amp or something, just makes the instrument like fit into into a mix, and like going from a single source into something that like works together with other instruments. It's really important. Thank you so much,
Christian. Thank you.
I'll see you at the booth later, and I would love to check out some of your basses. I mean, I played Nollies, and he kept on talking about you should talk to Sheldon, best basses ever. So I would love to try one at the studio.
We have the world's first onboard Rupert Neve designed bass preamp.
Oh, Rupert Neve designed bass preamp.
Yeah,
nice.
we worked with them. We sent them a bass, and it turns out the entire engineering team are our bass players. And so not only did they design a preamp specifically for our bass, but they swapped components. And so every component...
Right, we haven't talked about preamps and EQs at all, right? We've missed that one. But you have a from what are they called? Rupert Neve Designs, I think, right? So they designed an active preamp and the EQ?
Just for us.
Just for you.
We're the only company in the world that has one.
Wow. I want to try that one.
It's very cool.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christian.
Check out Dingwall Basses. Time to go back to Guitar Summit. Thanks for watching, everybody. I see you in hell, motherfuckers. Bye-bye.